A few weeks ago, I spelled out the size of the challenge before us and called for a national debate on social policy, and I'm grateful to you for the way you explain the size of the challenge we face in the press. Thank you. At that time, I said that once the architecture of the policies had been sufficiently matured into broad outline, I would bring them into the public arena in order to help stimulate a debate. That moment has now arrived. In addition, I would also like to take you through an approximate timetable that I have set out to both help stimulate the debate throughout the rest of the summer and on into the autumn, but also what I hope to see happen after that. But before I take you through a short presentation, after which I would be pleased to answer any questions you might have, I would first like to say a few words to you as journalists about what I hope to achieve in this debate, because it will only prove possible if you decide to encourage it. It's not been our tradition to conduct ourselves on the island in this way, but the circumstances we find ourselves in are exceptional. Government, in conjunction with Tynwald, must and will lead. That is what we are elected to do. However, the issues are so significant that they will require full public engagement at the earliest possible stage in a way that goes way beyond a standard consultation. Over the last 30 years, we have passed through an extraordinary period of benign and solid economic growth, during which we, perhaps inevitably, became quite comfortable and not a little complacent. That period is now over. And if we are to ensure the next 30 years are to be a success story for the Isle of Man, then we are going to have to start thinking in new and imaginative ways. That is also what today, and indeed this summer's debate, is all about. I may well be the minister right now, but this is about your future. You're all younger than I am. To achieve success, we have to engineer significant change whilst at the same time continuing to grow our economy and thus maintain confidence. All this against the backdrop of considerable international economic uncertainty. When considering the size of our budget challenge, this will be no mean feat. If we allow ourselves to think differently, I have no doubt that we will succeed. We need to think differently if we are to overcome the exponential rise in the cost of benefits, while still continuing to protect the truly vulnerable. We need to think in a different way if we are to help people fully realise their own potential, whatever their own circumstances are. As we share much, but not all, of our existing benefit system with that of the UK, let me start with a comment from a recent white paper produced by that jurisdiction on the subject. And here I quote a few key extracts from that report. Successive governments have ignored the need for fundamental welfare reform, not because they did not think that reform was needed, but because they thought it too difficult to achieve. It goes on. Instead of grasping the nettle, they watched as economic growth bypassed the worst off and welfare dependency took root. Further, the welfare bill has become unsustainably expensive. And finally, a life on benefits is a poor substitute for a working life, but too much of our current system is geared towards maintaining people on benefits rather than helping them to flourish in work. So that's one side of the coin. I now wish to draw your attention to the other side. Just as there are parallels with the UK, then so there are differences insofar as to remain competitive, to continue to encourage growth in our economy, we must remain a low-tax jurisdiction. It makes little or no sense that despite our taxation environment, we still operate a universal benefit system. In fact, it is perhaps deeply surprising that we still do. The challenge we face is to bring both sides together, to provide the engine for a rebalancing programme that will be seen to be fair by all sections of our community. One way of achieving this will be to use what I call the two-way escalator. It will be the engine at the centre of our policies and will drive the rebalancing programme. It recognises two simple principles. One, that our benefits system is in many respects universal and therefore badly targeted. And two, that our benefits system often traps the recipient in a culture of dependency. Properly developed, the two-way escalator will deal with both these issues. In the downward direction, it will reduce the burden of cost through means testing. And in the upward direction, it will ensure we embark on a programme of re-enablement right across a range of areas, whilst always ensuring we continue to fully protect the truly vulnerable. Turning first to means testing. As I've already intimated, I believe the choice is a simple one. We either retain our existing universal benefits system, which is not fit for purpose, and fund it by a significant increase in taxation, thus profoundly undermining our economy and losing jobs, or we introduce means testing, thus ensuring benefits are properly targeted, while still retaining a key advantage for our continued economic growth. Okay, this is a simple principle to describe and easy to understand, but requires a very considerable amount of work indeed in a number of government departments if this is to be achieved. It has been led by my department and Treasury, and we have a number of work streams already in progress, and these will run concurrently behind the scenes whilst the public debate is developed. It introduces a new way of thinking. That is why we must have a public debate. As you can see, the two-way escalator divides the population into four broad groups of households, but there is nothing religious about this. It could well ultimately be described in more or less groups with a variety of refinements depending on the subject matters. And I'll just go through the four as I've described them here. We have the supported at the bottom, effectively those on benefits, those unable, as it were, to secure an independent income. And the next group I've described as the coping, that significant group of people with enormous pride who perhaps sometimes look down to those on benefits and say, well, actually, you know, life's difficult, but we're determined to remain independent. The problem we've got is that we've got a cliff edge between those two. We've got no real movement. And then you've got the bulk of the population, which I call the self-sufficient. You know, the typical family who just manages to get enough money for the annual holiday and look forward to enormously. The family that have got a nice car and look after it, but perhaps it's second-hand. You know, most people, most families. And then the well-off at the top, people who simply do not need to worry on a day-to-day basis about cash and they've got significant disposable income. So those are the way I've described the four groups. In detail, there will be an obvious need to refine it further, but this is by way of indication. Within the context of means testing, each group will be considered in a different way. Overall, the potential for savings is very considerable indeed, by ensuring scarce public resources are carefully targeted to those in the greatest need. Turning now to the re-enablement programme, this is more difficult to describe in a few words, as it will be diverse and multifaceted. But let me highlight two first principles to help give it some shape. First, consider the principal role of my department. And I've described it here very simply as a simple box. It's a room. We have a door in, and people needing assistance, support, guidance, whatever, come in, and there are two doors out. One door is for those who we have established as being truly vulnerable, those who will continue to need close and careful and ongoing support. And the second door is the re-enablement door, if you like, the process of assessing how people can be helped to help themselves, getting away from this concept of the benefit trap and the cliff edge. And you see listed the main responsibilities that my department have. You know, for example, that we're in the midst of a major programme on children and families. You will already be aware that there's a significant and major re-enablement programme underway for the elderly care side, and we're also beginning now to look at other adult areas. We've had our largest housing review in 30 years, and we've got to focus increasingly on the needs of the disabled. So all of those groups will be continually considered in the light of the concept of bringing people into an area of support, defining what that support is, and either moving them on into a form of partial or whole independence, or continued support as the truly vulnerable. So that, in a simple box, is what my department is doing in re-enablement. The second concept of re-enablement is not about money, but about the provision of opportunity, services and incentives to encourage a movement away from a culture of rights and entitlements, and I can't emphasise this enough, towards one of an increased sense of personal responsibility and personal self-worth. By way of example, in the area of child issues, Frank Field MP brilliantly articulates this argument in his recent work, The Foundation Years, Preventing Poor Children Becoming Poor Adults, and I commend his report to you. So if you can return to the escalator, Jerry. Re-enablement takes many different forms, too many to discuss here, be it in housing, provision for the elderly, adult disabilities, child issues, or getting back to work. I will come back to these with you progressively in detail during the summer, one after the other. The principle built into the escalator is that policy will always be designed to do everything possible to encourage the movement from a lower level to a higher level until maximum potential is achieved, whatever that may be for any given individual. For example, the potential for movement on the part of one person might be very considerable indeed over time, whilst for the next, although perhaps limited, will be significant for that individual. I think it's important to say here that the two-way escalator will not only avoid the waste of taxpayers' money and assist enormously in moving away from the dependency culture, but, where appropriate, will allow for the cross-fertilisation of funds in order to boost specific re-enablement programmes, thus moving us away from silo thinking, which has bedevilled Isle of Man government thinking. In other words, a far greater degree of targeting funds against the backdrop of policy priorities as they're developed, policies grown out of clear principles which hopefully will enjoy wide support. A few weeks ago, I tried with your help to point out the size of the budgetary challenge we face within social care and our benefits system. And today, I have tried to show you something of the outline thinking as to how we intend to meet that challenge. I have consciously decided to consult in two stages to avoid trying to convey too many measures at once. These will both start in the next few weeks. Firstly, I will launch a consultation document on the case for greater means and needs testing. This will then run for the whole of the summer, and I will encourage involvement through articles, interviews, and hopefully some radio and internet programmes and pieces. Secondly, I will be publishing a further consultation document on the case for greater re-enablement and personal responsibility. Again, this consultation will run over the summer, and once again I will encourage involvement of the media. The launch of each consultation will be accompanied by a further press conference. You may think this is too protracted, but there is so much to say, and to try to say it all at once would engage us in overload, in the public's perception, confusion, and therefore possible failure, and we cannot afford to fail. In parallel with this, the work I have already mentioned will continue with a view to working up specific proposals to be presented for consideration by the Council of Ministers Social Policy Committee, which I chair. By October, the consultation comments will have been consolidated, which, brought together with the work done by the Social Policy Committee, should place us in a position to submit proposals for consideration by the full Council of Ministers in November, in preparation for a major social policy debate in December in Tynwald. Much will depend on being able to get public engagement. Today's message is about getting across two simple core principles. One, asking the public to accept we have to choose between higher taxation or means testing. That effectively is the lower side of the two-way escalator. And two, that government recognises much more needs to be done to improve our benefits system in order to ensure everyone achieves their full potential in life through re-enablement and fulfil their responsibilities to society in return for the support they receive. That's the upper side of the escalator. Ladies and gentlemen, this agenda is all about fairness across all elements of our community, and much will depend on how we respond to the challenge. Thank you very much.